Well, Ernest Gaines is a black American writer who lives in Lafayette and teaches, and so they grew up in the Bayou. You may be familiar with him, the autobiography of Jane Pittman. You know, like the last survivor of the slave, with Cicely Tyson. Portrait was, you know, years ago a very popular television movie. And his most recent work is called A Lesson Before Dying, which is the story of a young man accused of, I don't know, rape or murder or something, and on death row, and he'd been called like that he could not even articulate during the trial, like he was no less than a pig or so. And so he learns, and he doesn't know to read or to write. So on death row, a teacher comes to find him, or is it his grandmother or mother? Both of them always play a very important part in Ernest Gaines' novels, and teaches him reading and writing before he's executed. You might say, what a useless knowledge if you're to die anyhow, but such he finds his dignity. I was very tempted to do it, but then other things came in between, because by sheer coincidence, and I had no relation at all to the South or to black people in general, except for the truck drivers when I was a child, who impressed us so much. So his novel, A Gathering of Old Men, came to me through the playwright Charles Fuller, who had written A Soldier's Story, his best-known play, who had written a screenplay based on it and was looking for a director to do it. Encouraged by the death of a salesman experience, I thought, well, if I can deal with a salesman family in Brooklyn, maybe I can deal with black people in Louisiana. I mean, I overcame all the inhibitions of cultural borders, which in Europe are so immense, like that the French would not accept my Proust or so. And that, God forbid, I couldn't go and make a film in Italy or Spain because cultural borders. You come as a foreigner to the United States, Milos Forman, you know, whatever, does One Flew Over the Cuckoo Net, or Billy Wilder and all the generation in the 30s, they hardly spoke English and did the best American movies. Bless America. So I dared to go down there and met I don't know where he was living at the time, this writer Ernest Gaines, and he took me around to the places where he grew up, because this was obviously based somehow on the story he either lived or heard of in his time. Now, when was his time? 40s, 50s? It's not very clear from the novel, and he didn't want to put a date on it. I said, but I need to know, to pick the cars, what years the cars are. It's not clear even in the movie. It's not nowadays. Let's say it's in the recent past. That was 20 years ago when it was made. The story is in 3 words, really. A white farm supervisor on a sugarcane field is found shot. He's been known to be extremely brutal and ruthless to everybody. So who did it? He's found shot in front of the cabin of of one of the older workers there, as portrayed by Lou Gossett Jr. And he pretends that he did it. There's a young girl, Holly Hunter, who is kind of grew up with him, with this old man, and she instinctively knows it can't have been him. And she sums up all the other guys, mostly older guys, hence gathering of old men, to come there in order to prevent the sheriff from arresting Lou Gossett. And when the sheriff arrives, Richard Whitmark no less, these guys and ask who did it, they all step forward and each of them says, I did it. And as proof, they show their guns and they're all fired, whatever, a gauge 9 shot. So they have the how do you say, not the bullet, the patron in their gun. As proof.
Was this movie for television or was it a feature?
It was, like Death of a Salesman, it was released worldwide as a feature film by Orion Pictures at the time, but in America it was on CBS. It was like the follow-up to the Death of a Salesman. After, I mean, they entrusted me, or they financed the film, but we shot on 35. And anyhow, this is like this in Spartacus. You have this situation where they all step forward and say, "I did it," and now every one of them explains why he had good reason to do it, and that is kind of the core scene. The whole thing happens within 24 hours in front of this cabin, and that's the scene I'm going to play. As we see here on the picture, this is a situation on a plantation as it doesn't exist anymore nowadays. It used to be when Ernest Gaines grew up, say you had the antebellum plantation house somewhere here to the right, and then you had what they called the quarter cabins where the families were living. Most of the time only the chimney is left. After, I don't know when, earlier in the past century, it was, that is my reading now, it was considered shameful to still live in these cedar wood cabins, which were there from the times of the slavery. Everybody moved out, and now they're living in horrible so-called mobile homes, or everything but mobile, because half sunk in the swamps and of plastic and horrible. And these houses had a lot of advantages. I'd much rather live in one of these cabins than in a mobile home. Anyhow, so this is one of the few places where we still found the setting and where we set up the thing. You have the situation, Candy's car, Holly Hunter's car is here, so she is somewhere with them. The sheriff says, okay, if each one of you did it, that can't be possible. I'll wait until the one steps forward who can prove that he did it. And he settles down and reads his newspaper. The funeral car comes to pick up the body of the guy who was shot, and we can take it from there. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory, and then maybe we can talk. I can tell you more about it. Now, which button do I hit to?
Just the space bar.
Sorry?
Space bar.
you have any sound there?
No, it's not plugged in.
No. Just stop a minute because it's essential. Here is the.
They come out on the computer, maybe? This is Ron Carter's music and his bass.
I'll come to the name.
Hey, buddy, mind your hands now. He's not chewing a yank. Mind your hands.
How you feeling, Vincent?
Fine, sir. You?
Tired. Kind of tired. Thought I did a little fishing in. Tell them to go home, Vincent. They'll do it if you tell them to. If they don't, there's going to be trouble.
Yeah,
You don't
sir.
have to answer.
I don't mind talking to you.
Tell them to go home. I've always been fair with you, you know that. Remember that alligator we caught in 53 down in the Halleluyah? Tell them to tell who did it.
I did, sir.
I know you did it, but I have to hear it from one of them. Somebody has to say they came here after it happened. You don't want to see it hurt, do you?
Sir. Man got two. You got two. You make you different from a boy.
I'm asking you man to man. Tell them to go home.
It ain't gonna work this time, Sheriff.
Who said that?
I did.
Plant 2? You're the last man I thought would be looking for trouble with the law.
It's been no trouble.
What's that mean?
I'm old.
So,
By the time I had trouble with the law,
you're going to jail.
I figured I was on my way when I shot him.
Amen. Oh, now ain't it a little bit late to be getting militant around here?
I've always been militant. My entrance gone sour, keeping my militants down.
I see.
No, you don't see, Sheriff. You don't see the flowers we used to see when there was no weeds. Kaboom! Empty school. Fine. They all used to sit out there on the porches. They all had flowers. Nobody had 4 o'clocks like tattoo Spain. 4 o'clock every afternoon. They don't have justice for you. Remember?
Jack and Big Brother hitting the fields every morning with them 2 mules, Diamond and Joe.
Tell me, who could beat those 2 men plowing the road?
Nobody. There was then.
Lord. You thought you all can't remember the early mornings? Something come up over them Jeeps. Remember Harry, that old blue red rider, how they used to hit the field?
Any of y'all remember anybody that could outwork Harry and the Red Rider?
34
tractor, plot up their graves, and get rid of all the truth that ever was. No, my brother Silas, you can't see him. Last black man around here to sharecropper, and we told him to stop it. Marshall dosed out all the best land to the Cajuns anyway. Get off the land, we told him. Raced that mule against the tractor and won. There ain't no black man supposed to win around here. He beat my brother down to the ground. I didn't move, didn't do nothing. And I was there, y'all don't know, but y'all wasn't there. I ain't been able to talk about it before. Been in here all these years, boring in there. Fear done spoiled my interest. Fear. I don't know how come I'm still alive. Silas, forgive me. Can you hear me? Forgive me, Silas. Where was the law? Where was the law then?
If I was sheriff around here, they wouldn't be talking to me that way.
Just stick around long enough.
Griffin, shut up. We ain't run out of stories.
I don't want to hear any more. As far as I'm concerned, you won't run out of stories. So it's all on Fix, whether he did anything or not. Fix is going to pay for everything that ever happened to you. Is that it? Fix didn't change things around here. Progress did. And Fix wasn't even there the night I'm going to die in a hospital, Volker. You're blaming the wrong man. And you're talking 30, 40 years ago. With no proof Fix was in India.
You get killed, lynched, shot, guts all hanging out, and here he come up with ain't no proof. Who did? Ain't that just like white folks? And it ain't been no 40, 50 years ago. Right here in them demonstrations, somebody was always turning up missing. Things ain't that nice around here now.
I can take you to jail, Blum.
I'm ready to go.
Me too. All or none, huh? Is that how you organized it?
Why don't we just throw that old coon in the back of the car and get out of here?
You sure got a big mouth for somebody to holler at your butt.
Well, we're all one big happy family.
Do you need to lie down? He hasn't felt well lately, suffering from disc spell.
I get busy spells too. Every time I screw something.
You know, there's 25 of them there now, not counting Fix's crowd. And more coming.
The quiet was all I heard of it. Fix will be here when he gets them all together. You all know that, don't you?
We'll be here too, Sheriff. We'll be here too.
I wish you salt and pepper as some combination. Oh, did you see that?
Just a few explanations for better understanding. So Fix they're talking about is the owner of the plantation and his family, and of course they gathered together now since the sheriff doesn't seem to find...
One question to clarify. Doesn't Fix and his family rent it from Holly Hunter's family?
Yeah, that's right.
Actually,
Okay, yeah, even more precise, yes. Now we go into the social structure. You're absolutely right. Holly Hunter has this privileged position because her family, parents died, owns the plantation. That is kind of the old southern families. They rent it out to the Cajuns, population that immigrated from Brittany via Nova Scotia, then followed all the way down into the Bayou, and lived there and spoke French until television killed the diversity of languages through the Good Morning Show. These Cajuns and speaking French were always, like considered a foreign element and pushed into the delta where they lived off shrimping. So you had two underprivileged groups, so to speak, the former slaves and the Cajuns, and they were somehow set against each other because the white owners used the Cajuns to run the farms, and so they had to take care of the black workers. So to this day, there is kind of a friendship and aggressive relationship between them, dating from this time. I mean, this would be endless now to go into it. But thanks for the clarification. So anyhow, this group, the Fixes group, the renters or whatever it's called of the farmland are gathering together in another place, and they certainly will come over now to take care of the situation because one of them was killed by one of these black guys. So the obvious is about to happen, and the sheriff tries to save the situation by arresting on time one whom he could say, I got the guilty one, and put him safely away. Whether that is Lou Gossett or any one of the others. What I liked when I read it, I think was this scene I've just been playing here, which is almost like an opera choir, an ensemble, where and it started earlier and it follows up, where every one of them gives the reason and talks about the past. So the only thing we have is this very tense situation. Somebody got shot, somebody will have to pay for it, and in the meantime, the stage is set to tell stories, because we all want to know how is it going to end. So in the meantime, you're sure to have the attention that everybody can tell his stories. I mean, this is kind of in dramatic terms. The real difficulty for me was how to cast and how to perform this, coming in as a foreigner and not being part of this culture. And this was before Spike Lee and the others did their first movies, so there was, I think the movie dates therefore very much, because in the meantime there has been such an emancipated filmmaking by black filmmakers that this is seems like a little bit dated. So how to cast it and how to perform these dialogues. Obviously, Ernest Gaines is from there. He knew these people and knew how the beauty in his writing is really in the dialogue. It's this turn of phrases, like when she says, "They were men then." This, to turn around, come back at the end, but there were hardly any actors in New Orleans. of that age that I could find in cast. We took some musicians then to play the parts, and all the other actors were living of that age, were living either in New York or Los Angeles. Most of them had never been to the South, and some of them refused outright to go there. There was still such a resentment at the sheer idea to go there that it took me a lot of talk to convince them. They are all the faces you are familiar with that worked with whatnot, John Ford and whom not, Woody Strode.
A lot of them are from the vaudeville.
Sorry?
A lot of them are from the vaudeville era. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, like Sam Henson.
And the interesting part is, so I had them come down to little place, Thibodaux, Louisiana, in the bayou, and to meet each other. And I wish we had had a camera, because then happened the exact same thing as what we've just in the scene. They started to tell their stories. How come they didn't want to go to the South? For some, how come it was their first experience? How they related to Richard Widmark. Most of them had worked with in the 50s in some westerns or other movies. It was a pretty good gathering of old men, and unfortunately we didn't record any of it. They talk. One of them, it's Woody Strode, I think, talks about the tractor who's going to plow the graveyard. That is a thing. 2 years ago, there was an item, half page in the New York Times. Ernest Gaines bought a graveyard. So that's many years later. He is still at it, because the graveyards of the workers there, they were not by the churches, but they were somewhere out in the fields, most of the time under some huge trees. And so in order to maximize farming, these graveyards have almost all vanished and simply be plowed over, and no horror movies or so, and that was it. So that's what he is referring to. It just struck me when I heard it, because Ernest Gaines then bought one of these graveyards just to preserve it, and brought the stones and whatever he could find from other graveyards which had been plowed over to assemble there. Because he finds that, and that's why he's writing, and that's why they are telling the stories how it used to be, that the memory has to be preserved to create some kind of identity among them, which was not facilitated, as against the Cajuns, who, despite all pressures, for 30 years it was forbidden to speak French. Not only did they not learn French in the school, but the language was strictly forbidden. But the kids spoke it at home, of course, and so when they came to school, and they spoke a word of French, they were punished. This in the 50s and up into the 60s. But they kept their language, and they had their religion, they're Catholic, of course, and they had their churches, and they had their graveyards. So they managed, from emigrating from Brittany in the 17th century, living first in Nova Scotia and then expelled from there instead of going back to France, traveled all down the rivers and into the delta, where they found refuge. they kept their identity, not only the cooking and the garlic we all like, and the jambalaya and the fer dodo and the music. And the people who grew up on the liberated slaves had no memory. It was, but this went a long way back, because when they were brought in as slaves from Africa, and say they came to Brazil or to Jamaica, entire villages brought from Africa were settled in these places. As a result, they kept traditions which evolved into voodoo tales from their villages, they had some social structures and some memories they brought with them, and some traditions. In New Orleans, they were sold piecewise. So the men, the women, the children, everybody was discarded and mixed up then and came to a plantation. And say of 100 slaves in the plantation, not 2 came from the same African background or the same village. So they could not develop any traditional memory. They had a hard time to create any time of a unity among them, and therefore it was much easier to manage them. There was less unity and less strength, and let's say also less dignity, pride, self-esteem, and whatever. I mean, the backbone was broken. Not much to do with directly here what we hear, because now when they tell their stories about how it was when they worked the field with their mules and whatnot, there was a togetherness, but this memory, in a sense, fell apart and was broken when they were liberated, because then everybody was off again on his own to go somewhere. So the tradition they had formed and the togetherness and the union during the time they were slaves on the plantation was again broken. It's that I'm just dealing with some of this debris, I'd almost call it. You've seen the scene where the funeral car hits the sheriff's car and the kids come running, and laughing, of course, and enjoying it. Well, I did adopt 2 of these kids then, 25 years ago, and they are still debris. Despite every effort put into it, it's still, just this morning, had a long email and call and whatnot. Drugs and prison and shit. So when I said yesterday that the socialist system had destroyed not only the landscapes and the cities in Eastern Europe, that it had destroyed people, well, that lasted only for 40 years. It's too upsetting. Whether it lasted 200 or more years, and the result is what you see when you go down there. Is it? Yeah. That's the dark side. Worse than the American dream for the white middle class. It's a terrible waste. Is it 10 or 15 million people just discarded? Yeah. So it's, I was saying, when we were working and looking for a way to do this, I thought it was so written by Ernest Gaines that the only way to perform it was in this kind of very classical, almost opera-like way. It seemed to have disturbed somehow the audience. I could never figure out what it was. There must have been a transcultural problem. Ernest Gaines liked it very much, and at the same time said he did not quite recognize his book. So that is a mystery to me, and I don't know how. I know how one could have done it differently, basically with improvisation. You see, you just take the situation and take these actors, each one of them having his own history, his stories to tell, and you go in there with a handheld camera or whatever. You probably could have, played out and achieved a very vivid contemporary thing. I often thought about that afterwards when I came to know the place better, and for the past 25 years, once or twice a year, I've been down there because of this family, so to speak. But I still, when I see it here, and I hadn't seen it in a while, I enjoy this almost theatrical way of delivering these lines, because they are literature. They are written. It's not ordinary, everyday speech. So we came to this through the rehearsal. So we had about more than half of the actors came from New York or Los Angeles. Another part of them came from New Orleans, much less than I would have expected. And because there is no theater or no tradition of that, there's music-wise there was more. Now after Katarina, there's probably even less. And the others were actually people who used to live in these houses and living now in mobile homes, and non-professionals. And that was very fascinating, because they tried to teach the New York actors how to say these lines, or the other way around. The New York actors read the lines and asked them, "Is this the way you do it, or how would you say it?" There was a very, very interesting exchange, and actually the number one go-between was not Holly Hunter, who had her Georgian accent and was not that much involved in it, but was Richard Widmark. He was very engaged in this process. Beliefs came up, some of the locals in this group there, like also all the ladies up there on the porch, they were locals, and when there was a line before Richard Widmark shows up and the guy points down the road and says, "Here comes the law," two of them took off in the fields. They could not make the difference of Richard Widmark, sheriff in the movie, from the real sheriff, and "Here comes the law, well, we better take off." That much they were involved in the situation. Or for several days of shooting, the man who was shot dead his body had to be there in front of the porch at a certain point, they covered him with a blanket. So as soon as he was the blanket was over, we put a dummy there so that just legs and arms would show up, and now one of the guys who spoke mostly Creole, he said, "Oh, the poor guy, you know, is a nice fellow, and why does he always have to lie out there in the sun?" And I say, "No, Eugene." Was his name? No, Eugene. It's just a dummy. And I lift the blanket to show him. He goes, "That's even worse. You know, he was into voodoo and things you have to deal with, you know, in the 20th century, as soon as you get a bit away from Fifth Avenue." What else can I tell you about it? So in the Ernest Gaines novel, this ended with the inevitable shootout. You know, they shoot at each other, and there's a few dead ones on both sides. Charles Fuller, the playwright, said, "First of all, I don't buy it. If there had been a shootout and with several dead, we would know about it." In a sense, I mean, if you take the story really. So this kind of a shootout never happened. There may have been a lynching and this and that, and there certainly was. There was fire thrown into church, and we all know that. But a shootout of 12 old guys against a group of Cajuns, I don't buy it, he said. And in fact, Ernest Gaines admitted that he was inspired by a real story, but this never happened. Fuller also said, "I'm sick and tired of this old Western scheme where it escalates, and then finally showdown, and one has to die. There must be another way of solving problems." And the fact is that the group of guys who mostly young and half drunk to come there to do their killing, when they confronted with these 18 guns pointed at them from the porch, they back out, and that's the end. What else may you be interested in? What question can I answer?
I think it's interesting what you mentioned about, sort of I guess a renaissance in black film with Spike Lee and everything, and sort of the innovations that have been made in terms of cinematography and lighting of actors and makeup. And you mentioned, I thought it was interesting what happened in the Tin Drum with the triangles to make people look younger, and in the inverted triangle to make people look older. These sorts of strategies. And so the question occurred to me: Did you have any particular challenges with makeup and lighting for the actors at all?
Well, there was a big challenge with lighting, because this whole story happens basically in one afternoon, and it ends in the night. And of course, we were shooting over several weeks. So in a sense, you would always have to wait for the same afternoon light to keep on shooting the scene, which would be unfeasible production-wise. You have to start shooting early in the morning and into the night and whatever. So we always had to break down our program in scenes. We didn't shoot in this direction, in that direction, and the afternoon shots with the sun setting, every day at 5 we would start doing those. That was a real problem, otherwise there was no lighting. As for the makeup, the only one who had makeup was Lou Gossett Jr., who was of course not an old man, who was 50 or 55, who was just after Officer and Gentleman. He had his Oscar, and he was kind of the financing pivot of the enterprise, because Holly Hunter was still strictly unknown. And funny enough, she doesn't mention this movie in any of her biographies or filmographies, as if she was ashamed of. In fact, she has some wonderful scenes. She had a hard time getting along with Richard Widmark. Both of them came at some point to meet to complain about each other. She said, well, he's treating me like shit. And he came to me and said, well, what is this actress? I mean, this Hungarian actress and so. And I mean, maybe more discreetly, just summing up to make the point. And I came to find out that Richard Widmark is hard of hearing on one ear. I mean, I would say totally not hearing. Holly, the same, but on the other ear. They did not understand each other, and people who are hard of hearing get easily paranoid. Now the thing is, he was on the right ear and she was on the left ear. When I switched positions, they could hear each other and the problem was solved. But how could I know beforehand? Another anecdote, maybe to finish on a positive note, was so there was night shoot. At the end, it goes into a night shoot for this not unhappy ending, or actually happy ending, not non-violent ending, which may have be a reason why the film is not so well known. I think everybody would have enjoyed a violent ending. I come, so it's a night shoot, but I come with the cinematographer in the morning at 9 to prep for the night. And as we drive down this dirt road towards the cabin, I see Richard Widmark pacing up and down. Oh my God, he misread the call sheet. It's not 9 a.m., it's 9 p.m. And I go, and how do you dig, and how do you, and so on. Fine, and I say, but you know, it's a night shoot. Oh yeah, I know, don't worry. I said, what are you doing here? Well, you know, night shoots are always so confusing with the lights and, you know, and cables, and you stumble and you don't know. So I came to prep my scene, because he's finally going to arrest Lou Gossett. So I'm up here on the porch, you know, I put the handcuff on him, and I have these few lines to tell him before we take off in the car. So now I figured it's 4 steps from the chair where he's sitting to the stairs, then it's 3 steps down the stairs, and then across the yard to the sheriff car. The car is another 10 steps, and I timed the dialogue so that on the last word I can slam the door. I'll do it a few more times, and then I'll get off to the hotel and have a good sleep before tonight. He must have had, 150 movies under his belt, 74 years old. That's professional. And that's then how this generation of actors can act so naturally. Because there's hard work behind it, you know. It always is striking when you see the old movies with what authority, you know, they move and take their gun and get on the horse or get off, deliver a line, turn around. It's like a ballet. Well, it's because apparently they were used to do it that way. But now that I'm more rested and overcame my thing, I'll just explain you in a few words. I owe that the background. When the shooting was over and I was fond of these kids, I told the casting person, you know, when they grow up and they want to go to college or so, you know, I'd like to do something for them. And she said, what do you mean college? What are you talking about? You know, I bet, you know, they were 10, was just the 10th birthday of the one and 9 the other. I bet they don't even know the alphabet by now. So I take the plane to New York, and it takes a while, and I think about it, and then I call her from New York, and I say, well, what can one do now so that they learn the alphabet? And she said, well, take them out of the public school and put them into a private school. Oh, we found a private school in Thibodeau, a Cajun school. I was very happy to accept them because they said, well, we ought to have black kids anyhow, but we don't have any, so they're very welcome. They attend the school for a while, and after a year or two, and in the vacations, Christmas and summer, they spent with me, either in New York, where I was living at the time, or the summer vacations in Italy, which they didn't like very much. Boy, I couldn't live down here. They said it was too foreign. But I found out, well, I said, don't you want to write a postcard? And the girl easily wrote, Mahogany is her name, and he scribbled. And I said, how is this possible? After 2 years now of private school, you still don't know what to write. I go into a little inquiry. He was dyslexic, or how do you call that, you know. Nobody in the school where I was, you know, at least once a year and benefactor and, you know, buying curtains for their theater and whatnot, or contributing to the basketball court. Nobody thought it was any special that this boy wouldn't be able to read or write. Prejudice or what didn't expect there, I never found out. Anyhow, by now he was 14, it was very difficult. I tried to get him into a program. He ran off, it didn't work. I tried to have him live with me in New York. That was even worse. He wanted to go back, so he went back. Started to work well. Basically, he never even got his GED. As a result, he's pouring cement, never got a decent job, went into drugs and whatnot, dealing, prison, and so after 20 years of goodwill and effort, one man did not make a difference, and simply because the surrounding is stronger and the circumstances. Of course, I could have taken him to Germany. By now he would have learned German. Maybe he would have learned how to live down here. But it's tragic. It's a debris. And you see it with your own eyes, and this is just one case, you know, and I mean, he's not in the streets. He's still been taken care of. But whenever I go there, and I do it a lot, I see hundreds of them, thousands, and it's incomprehensible. Of course, no health insurance whatsoever, no insurance, not even for the car. I mean, it's just endless. Brief. Not everything is pretty in the world. So we keep making movies to tell about these stories, and there's still a lot of stories to be told. Good. See you later.